The reality distortion weapon aboard the Council flagship, charged with the energy of a dying star, its alien mechanisms preparing to erase Earth's solar system from existence. Admiral Dexara stood before the weapon's control panel, his hands trembling as he prepared to commit genocide on a scale that even the Council had rarely attempted. This was no longer about conquest or submission. This was about survival of the Galactic Order itself. Captain Na-Un felt the weapon's energy build up through the Defiance's sensors like a growing scream in her consciousness. The quantum computers linked to her mind calculated probability matrices, in microseconds, searching for any scenario that led to humanity's survival. The mathematics were brutal and clear. They had less than 8 minutes before the weapon fired, and no conventional approach could stop it in time. The solution, when it came, was so audacious that even the ship's artificial intelligence systems flagged it as potentially impossible. Na-Un would have to take the Defiance directly through the Council fleet's defensive formation, penetrate the flagship's shields while under fire from thousands of weapons, and somehow disable the reality weapon before it could fire. The margin for error was measured in nanoseconds. Science Officer Bora initiated the final protocol, one that had been developed in Earth's deepest research facilities, but never tested in combat. The consciousness interface technology would be pushed beyond all safety limits, allowing the entire crew to merge their awareness with the ship's systems. They would become, for a brief time, more than human. They would become something that could think at the speed of light and react faster than the laws of physics should allow. The transformation was unlike anything the crew had experienced. Lieutenant Dongwu felt his consciousness expand to encompass every circuit and system in the ship. Communications Officer Minho became one with the quantum processing cores. Tactical Officer Heejin merged with the weapon system so completely that she could feel the molecular structure of the enemy ships she was targeting. The Defiance began its final approach, moving faster than anything in the Council fleet could track. The ship phased in and out of normal space, appearing and disappearing like a ghost ship from ancient human legends. Council weapons fired at empty space while the human vessel materialized elsewhere, its own weapons striking with surgical precision. Admiral Dexara watched in horror as his defensive formations collapsed. Ships that had fought together for centuries suddenly found their targeting systems failing, their shields fluctuating, their weapons misfiring. The microsensors that had been secretly attached to their hulls were now actively sabotaging their systems, turning the First Fleet's own technology into a weapon against them. With 3 minutes remaining before the reality weapon fired, the Defiance broke through the final defensive line. The ship's adaptive armor was glowing white-hot from absorbed energy impacts. Its quantum processors were operating at levels that should have caused immediate failure. The consciousness interface was pushing the crew's minds to the very limits of human endurance. Captain Na-Un made the final decision. Instead of trying to disable the reality weapon from outside the flagship, she would take the Defiance directly through the enemy ship's hull. The quantum phase generators would allow them to become temporarily intangible, phasing through the flagship's armor and materializing inside its most heavily defended section. The maneuver succeeded with seconds to spare. The Defiance materialized inside the Council flagship's central core, its weapons already trained on the reality weapons control systems. The explosion was contained within the flagship's hull, but the energy feedback destroyed the weapon and crippled the massive vessel. Admiral Dexara found himself staring at Captain Na-Un across the ruins of his command center. The human woman stood among the wreckage, her simple uniform untouched by the destruction around her. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute victory. She informed the Admiral that his fleet was now completely under humanity's control. The microsensors had infiltrated every system, every weapon, every vital component. The First Fleet could be disabled with a single command from the Defiance, but humanity was not interested in conquest or domination. They had come to offer the galaxy something it had not seen in 10,000 years. Freedom. The message that went out from Earth's solar system reached every corner of Council space within hours. The First Fleet had not just been defeated, it had been converted. Every Council ship now carried the message of human liberation, broadcasting to enslaved worlds that resistance was possible, that the Council could be challenged, that freedom was within reach. On 1,000 worlds, species that had known only servitude for millennia began to rise. The Council's iron grip on the galaxy started to crack as world after world declared independence. The message was simple and clear. Humanity had sent only one ship, but it had been enough to prove that the Council was not invincible. Ambassador Te Min returned to the Council chambers not as a supplicant, but as humanity's representative to a new galactic order. The species that had ruled through fear and force for 10,000 years would now have to learn to coexist as equals. The age of the Council was ending, and the age of freedom had begun. In the end, humanity's greatest weapon had not been superior technology or overwhelming force. It had been the simple revolutionary idea that every species deserved to be free, and the courage to fight for that freedom no matter the odds. One ship had been enough because it carried something the galaxy had forgotten: hope. Captain Nayun stood alone on the bridge of the UES Defiance, staring out at the endless field of stars that surrounded Earth's solar system. Her ship was humanity's only contribution to what the news media had already started calling the Council war. By galactic standards, the Defiance was not an impressive vessel. It measured 800 meters from nose to tail, carried a crew of only 200 people, and mounted weapons that most alien species would consider primitive toys. The ship had been built in Earth's orbital shipyards using technology that pushed the boundaries of human engineering to their absolute limits. Every system had been designed and redesigned dozens of times by the greatest scientific minds humanity had ever produced. The hull was made from adaptive metal alloys that could change their molecular structure in response to different types of damage. The engines used quantum field manipulation to achieve speeds that should have been impossible according to conventional physics. Lieutenant Dongwu approached his captain with the daily engineering report clutched in his hands. Every system aboard the Defiance was operating at peak efficiency levels. The adaptive armor plating could reconfigure itself in milliseconds to deflect different types of energy weapons. The quantum processing cores were running combat simulations at computational rates that would have been pure fantasy just decades earlier. Most importantly, the consciousness interface system was stable and ready for combat operations. This consciousness interface was humanity's greatest technological achievement and their most closely guarded secret. While other species in the galaxy had developed artificial intelligence systems to help with complex calculations and routine ship management, humans had chosen a completely different approach to the problem. Instead of building machines to think for them, they had learned how to directly connect their own minds with their technology. The process had taken decades to perfect and required extensive surgical modifications to the human nervous system. Tiny organic circuits were implanted throughout the brain and spinal cord, allowing direct neural interface with computer systems. The crew of the Defiance were not simply operating their ship in the traditional sense. When combat began, they would literally become one with their vessel, sharing thoughts and reflexes at the speed of light. Science Officer Bo-Ra monitored the incoming data streams from thousands of microsensors that had been secretly deployed throughout Council space during Ambassador Te Min's diplomatic mission. Each device was no larger than a grain of sand and virtually undetectable by conventional scanning methods. They had attached themselves to Council ships during routine maintenance operations and were now broadcasting detailed information about fleet movements, internal communications, and tactical preparations. The intelligence picture was clearer than anything humanity had ever possessed about an enemy force in their entire history. The Council's first fleet was indeed as formidable as their leaders claimed. 10,000 warships, each one individually more powerful than the Defiance in terms of raw firepower and defensive capability. Their energy shields could deflect massive amounts of destructive force. Their weapons could vaporize asteroids, and their armor had been tested successfully against the most advanced weapons of 47 different alien species. Communications Officer Min Ho received regular encrypted messages from Earth's defense command providing updates on the planet's military preparations. The homeworld's defense grids were online and ready for battle, but they would not be needed for this engagement. Humanity's political and military leadership had made a decision that would have seemed completely insane to any Council species. Earth's entire defense would rest on one ship and its crew of 200 volunteers. The decision had not been made lightly, or without careful consideration of all available alternatives. Earth's military leaders had run thousands of computer simulations testing different defensive strategies against the incoming Council fleet. Every conventional approach resulted in humanity's total defeat within hours of the first battle. Their only chance for survival lay in demonstrating capabilities that the Council had never encountered before. Tactical Officer Hae Jin completed her detailed analysis of the Council fleet's composition and probable attack patterns. The enemy had organized their ships according to standard battle doctrine that had remained essentially unchanged for centuries of successful conquests. They would approach Earth in a classic battle formation, expecting humanity to either surrender immediately or offer token resistance before being overwhelmed by superior numbers. The Council commanders had no way of knowing that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to defeat opponents who were bigger, stronger, and more numerous than themselves. On their homeworld, early humans had survived by outsmarting massive predators that could have killed them easily in direct confrontation. They had learned to use tools, terrain, and teamwork to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Captain Na Yun addressed her crew through the ship's internal communication system. She reminded them that they were not just representing humanity in the coming battle. They were fighting for the idea that freedom was worth defending regardless of the odds. Against success, every enslaved species in the galaxy would be watching to see if the Council's 10,000-year reign of terror could finally be challenged. The crew of the Defiance had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they would probably die in the attempt. None of them had families or loved ones waiting for their return. They had given up their normal lives to become something more than human, something that could fight impossible battles and maybe somehow achieve impossible victories. The consciousness interface technology would allow them to think and react faster than any biological brain should be able to function. Engineer Dong Wu ran final diagnostics on the ship's most critical systems. The quantum field generators that powered their faster-than-light engines were operating within acceptable parameters. The adaptive armor plating had been tested against every type of energy weapon in Earth's database. The consciousness interface circuits had been calibrated to each crew member's individual neural patterns, ensuring perfect synchronization when combat operations began. The Defiance was as ready as human technology could make it, but Captain Na-Un knew that technology alone would not be enough to win this battle. Success would depend on the crew's ability to think and fight as a single coordinated entity, while maintaining the creativity and adaptability that made humans unique among the galaxy's intelligent species. Weapons Officer Jun Ho monitored the status of their offensive systems. The Defiance carried particle beam cannons that could punch through most types of armor, quantum torpedoes that could disrupt matter at the molecular level, and kinetic projectile launchers that fired solid metal slugs at significant fractions of light speed. None of these weapons were particularly advanced by galactic standards, but they had been designed for maximum precision rather than raw destructive power. The ship's defensive systems were equally impressive. Energy shields that could absorb and redirect incoming attacks, point defense lasers that could intercept missiles and fighter craft, electronic warfare suites that could jam enemy sensors and disrupt their targeting systems. Most importantly, the consciousness interface would allow the crew to coordinate these defensive measures with inhuman speed and accuracy. As the Council's first fleet approached the edge of Earth's solar system, long-range sensors detected their emergence from hyperspace. 10,000 alien warships arranged in perfect battle formation, their weapons charging their shields at maximum power. Admiral Dex Ara had come to accept humanity's surrender or destroy their civilization completely. Captain Na-Yun felt the familiar sensation as her consciousness began to merge with the ship's computer systems. Around her, the other crew members were undergoing the same transformation, becoming more than human in preparation for the battle that would determine their species' fate. The Defiance began moving toward the Council fleet, accelerating to combat speed. The odds were mathematically impossible. 1 ship against 10,000. 200 humans against millions of alien warriors. By every reasonable calculation, the battle should be over before it truly began. Instead, it was about to become the most important military engagement in galactic history. The Council was about to learn that humans were not reasonable creatures, and that impossible odds simply meant the victory would be more satisfying when it finally came. The greatest battle in human history was about to begin, and Earth's entire future depended on the next few hours of combat. The crew of the Defiance prepared to show the galaxy that freedom was worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the enemy might be. By the third hour of combat, news of the impossible battle had spread throughout Council space faster than their fastest communication systems could carry official reports. On 1,000 different worlds, enslaved species huddled around their viewing screens, watching in stunned disbelief as updates filtered in from the First Fleet. The unthinkable was happening before their eyes. One human ship was not just surviving against the entire Council armada, but actually winning the engagement. Admiral Dexara had reorganized his remaining ships 7 different times, trying desperately to find some formation or tactical approach that could contain the human vessel. Nothing worked according to any military doctrine he had studied during his centuries of successful campaigns. The Defiance moved through his fleet like a force of nature, striking where it was least expected and vanishing before his ships could coordinate effective return fire. The consciousness interface technology allowed the human crew to think and react as a single unified entity, making tactical decisions faster than any Council commander could follow or predict. When Captain Nayun decided to change course, every system aboard the ship responded instantly, without the communication delays that plagued conventional military vessels. When Weapons Officer Junho identified a target, the ship's armaments were already firing before enemy sensors could detect the threat. Engineer Dongwu monitored the Defiance's critical systems from his position deep within the vessel's armored core. The quantum processing units were operating at 97% of maximum efficiency, despite the incredible computational load required for continuous combat operations. The adaptive armor had reconfigured itself over 2,000 times during the battle, automatically adjusting its molecular structure to deflect different types of energy weapons. The consciousness interface was holding steady despite the enormous mental strain of prolonged combat operations. Each crew member remained fully connected to their assigned systems while maintaining their individual personality and decision-making capabilities. The technology pushed human consciousness to its absolute limits, but it also unlocked capabilities that no other species in the galaxy had ever achieved. On the Council flagship, Intelligence Director Shailin finally understood the true nature of what they were fighting. The microscopic sensors that had been attached to their ships during the fleet's departure were not simply gathering intelligence for future use. They were actively interfering with Council military systems, in real time disrupting their operations and turning their own technology against them. Shield frequencies were being constantly adjusted, preventing the defensive systems from maintaining stable protective barriers. Weapon targeting computers were receiving subtle false data that threw their aim off by tiny but critical amounts. Internal communication networks experienced brief delays that prevented coordinated attacks from being properly synchronized. Humans had turned the First Fleet into a weapon against itself. The revelation came far too late to change the battle's outcome. Captain Na-Un had linked her consciousness so deeply with the Defiance's systems that she could feel every circuit, every sensor, and every weapon as if they were extensions of her own body. She anticipated the Council's tactical moves before their own commanders had finished formulating their plans. The ship responded to her mental commands with precision that made the impossible seem routine. Tactical Officer Hyejin coordinated the vessel's defensive systems with efficiency that bordered on supernatural. Each incoming attack was analyzed, categorized, and countered within microseconds of detection. The adaptive armor flowed like liquid metal, becoming denser where impacts were expected, and lighter where maneuverability was more important than protection. The quantum phase generators allowed sections of the ship to become temporarily intangible, letting enemy weapons fire pass harmlessly through empty space. The psychological damage to the Council fleet was becoming as devastating as the physical destruction being inflicted on their ships. These alien warriors had conquered the galaxy by demonstrating that resistance was futile and that superior technology always defeated inferior forces. They had never encountered an enemy that refused to be intimidated, that turned their own advantages against them, that fought with such impossible determination and skill. Communications Officer Min-ho intercepted increasingly desperate transmissions between Council vessels. Their commanders were requesting immediate reinforcements, reporting critical equipment malfunctions, and questioning the accuracy of their own sensor readings. The First Fleet, which had never experienced defeat in 10,000 years of conquest, was beginning to psychologically collapse under the pressure. The Council's First Fleet emerged from hyperspace like a metal storm, covering the outer regions of Earth's solar system with thousands of massive warships. Each vessel was a masterpiece of alien engineering built to destroy entire civilizations and enforce the Council's will across the galaxy. Admiral Dexara stood on his flagship's command bridge watching tactical displays as his ships spread into perfect battle formation. 10,000 vessels arranged according to military doctrine that had brought victory to the Council for thousands of years. Battle cruisers the size of cities took positions at the front of the formation. Massive carriers deployed millions of fighter craft that swarmed through space like angry insects. Dreadnoughts armed with planet-killing weapons moved into support positions ready to deliver decisive blows against any target foolish enough to resist. Sensor Officer Yan Su aboard the Defiance tracked every enemy ship as it materialized from hyperspace. The quantum processing cores integrated directly with her consciousness analyzed targeting solutions faster than any conventional computer system could manage. She could see the mathematical patterns in their formation, identify the predictable responses built into their tactical doctrine, and most importantly, spot the weaknesses that no Council commander would ever expect an enemy to exploit. The human ship appeared tiny and insignificant compared to the massive alien fleet surrounding it. The Defiance looked like a metal insect, flying toward a flock of giant predatory birds. Its weapons seemed pathetically small next to the enormous energy cannons mounted on Council battleships. Its armor appeared thin and fragile compared to the thick defensive plating that protected alien vessels from enemy fire. Admiral Dexara opened a communication channel, expecting to receive humanity's immediate and unconditional surrender. The species of the galaxy had learned over 10,000 years that resistance against the Council was not just futile, but suicidal. Civilizations that submitted quickly were allowed to survive as slaves. Those that fought back were exterminated, completely leaving nothing behind but radioactive ruins. Instead of surrender, Captain Na-Un's face appeared on the Admiral's viewing screen. She looked calm and composed despite facing odds that should have terrified any reasonable being in the galaxy. Her simple black uniform contrasted sharply with the elaborate ceremonial armor worn by Council military officers. When she spoke, her voice carried no fear or uncertainty, only quiet determination. She thanked Admiral Dexara for traveling such a great distance to visit humanity's home system. It was always pleasant to meet new species and learn about their cultures and technologies. However, she would have to politely decline his generous offer of surrender. The crew of the Defiance had come here to fight, and they intended to see the battle through to its conclusion regardless of the final outcome. The Council Admiral felt genuine confusion at the humans' response. Surely these primitives understood what they were facing. His fleet possessed enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. They had ended civilizations that had fought with courage, skill, and advanced technology for thousands of years. How could one small ship with primitive weapons possibly hope to challenge such overwhelming military superiority? Na-Un's reply was delivered in the same calm, steady tone she had used throughout their conversation. She explained that humans had always faced impossible odds throughout their evolutionary history. They had survived ice ages that should have frozen them to death. They had defeated predators that should have eaten them. They had built civilizations on a world that constantly tried to destroy them with natural disasters. Today's battle would be no different from any other challenge humanity had overcome. The Defiance began accelerating toward the Council fleet, moving faster than Admiral Dexara had expected possible for such a small vessel. The human ship's engines produced energy signatures that his sensors could not properly analyze. Its movement patterns violated several basic principles of physics that the Council's scientists had considered universal constants. Clearly, human technology was more advanced than their intelligence reports had suggested. When the approaching vessel came within weapons range, the first Council ships opened fire. Plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid belts unleashed their destructive energy. Particle beam weapons that could pierce any known type of armor fired concentrated streams of deadly radiation. Quantum torpedoes capable of destabilizing matter at the molecular level streaked through space toward their target. The combined firepower of 100 Council warships focused on the small human vessel. The amount of energy being directed at the Defiance was sufficient to destroy several small moons or reduce an entire city to glowing plasma. Any conventional spacecraft should have been vaporized instantly upon contact with such overwhelming destructive force. Instead, the human ship twisted through the incoming weapons fire with movements that seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. Captain Nayun's consciousness was directly linked to the vessel's navigation systems, allowing her to react with superhuman speed and precision to threats that appeared faster than biological reflexes should be able to process. The ship moved like a living creature, dodging and weaving through energy beams that should have been impossible to avoid. The Defiance's adaptive armor plating shifted and flowed like liquid metal, absorbing energy impacts that should have been immediately fatal. Where conventional defensive shields would have failed completely, the ship's quantum phase systems allowed sections of the hull to become temporarily intangible. Weapons fire passed harmlessly through empty space where solid matter had existed microseconds earlier. Weapons Officer Jun Ho initiated the counterattack with precision that stunned the Council fleet commanders. The Defiance's weapons were not particularly powerful by galactic standards, but they struck their targets with accuracy that bordered on supernatural. Each shot was calculated by quantum processing cores linked directly to human intuition, allowing the targeting systems to find weaknesses in enemy defenses that conventional sensors would never detect. The first Council ship to die exploded in Siam, a brilliant flash of light visible across half the solar system. Its reactor containment systems failed after a precisely targeted impact that exploited a microscopic flaw in the vessel's defensive grid. The explosion sent shockwaves through the enemy formation as commanders realized that the human ship was not just surviving their attacks, but actually fighting back with deadly effectiveness. Admiral Dex Ara immediately ordered his entire fleet to concentrate their firepower on the human vessel. Thousands of weapon systems swiveled to track the small ship that danced between their attacks like some kind of mythical creature from ancient legends. The space around the Defiance became filled with so much destructive energy that sensors could barely function through the interference. The human ship emerged from the storm of weapons fire with its hull scarred, but intact. Sections of the adaptive armor glowed white-hot from absorbed energy, but the underlying structure remained undamaged. The consciousness interface technology allowed the crew to distribute damage across the vessel's entire surface, preventing any single impact from causing critical system failures. More Council ships began to die as the battle continued, not destroyed by superior firepower but defeated by tactics and precision that none of their commanders had ever encountered before. The Defiance moved through the enemy fleet like a dancer weaving between partners at some deadly celebration. Every movement was perfectly calculated, every shot precisely aimed, and every defensive maneuver timed to the microsecond. The psychological impact on the Council fleet was becoming as important as the physical damage being inflicted. These alien warriors had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming numerical superiority. They had never faced an enemy that refused to be overwhelmed, that turned their own advantages against them, that fought with such impossible skill and determination. Communications between Council ships became increasingly frantic as commanders reported equipment malfunctions, targeting system failures, and sensor anomalies. The micro-devices that had been secretly attached to their hulls were now actively interfering with their military systems. Shield frequencies were being constantly adjusted. Weapon targeting was being subtly disrupted, and internal communications were experiencing mysterious delays. As the first hour of combat concluded, Admiral Dex Ara stared at his tactical displays in growing horror. His fleet had lost over 300 ships while the human vessel continued fighting with the same deadly efficiency it had shown from the very beginning. The Defiance should have been destroyed 1,000 times over, yet it continued to dance through their attacks like some kind of ghost ship from ancient nightmares. The Council's first fleet, which had never known defeat in 10,000 years of conquest, was being systematically dismantled by a single human ship and its crew of 200 volunteers. The impossible was happening, and none of the alien commanders knew how to respond to an enemy that seemed to violate every rule of warfare they had ever learned. The greatest military force in galactic history was about to discover that humans did not fight according to anyone else's rules, and that impossible odds simply meant the victory would be more satisfying when it finally arrived. The emergency meeting started before Taemin had even left the space station. In a private chamber deep inside the council headquarters, the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy gathered around a circular table made from metal that could survive the explosion of stars. The holographic displays still flickered in the air, showing their secret military information to anyone who cared to look. Military Commandant Korthak slammed all four of his massive arms against the table surface. He was 12 feet tall, covered in thick armor plating, and belonged to a species that had once ruled half the galaxy before the Council defeated them in a war that lasted 300 years. His people were born warriors who lived for battle and died with weapons in their hands. The idea that some unknown species could threaten the Council made his blood burn with rage. Intelligence Director Shilin sat quietly at the opposite end of the table. Her species looked almost human except for the large black eyes that could see across vast distances of space, and the delicate tendrils growing from her skull that allowed her to read thoughts from other beings. For over 5,000 years, her people had served as the Council's spy masters, gathering secrets from across the galaxy and preventing rebellions before they could start. Chancellor Vextar entered the room, and immediately the temperature dropped several degrees. His crystalline body was glowing bright red, which meant he was angrier than anyone had seen him in centuries. The holographic displays showing their military secrets were still active, and every few seconds new information appeared, showing just how completely humanity had penetrated their security systems. The Chancellor spoke directly into their minds, using his psychic abilities. He wanted to know exactly how one primitive human had managed to learn more about Council military operations in 3 days than most of their enemies discovered in decades of spying. Their security systems had been built by the greatest minds of 47 different species and improved constantly over thousands of years. Yet somehow this Taemin person had walked through their defenses like they did not exist. Director Shilin activated her own holographic display, showing the analysis her people had completed during the emergency session. The information the fellow human had displayed was not just current intelligence about their military forces. It included weapon designs that were still being developed in secret laboratories. It contained battle plans that existed only in the minds of top commanders who had never spoken them aloud. Most disturbing of all, it showed strategic assessments that had never been written down anywhere. Commandant Korthak roared that intelligence was useful for planning but useless in actual battle. His people had conquered dozens of worlds using nothing but courage, determination, and superior firepower. Humans might be clever at gathering information, but they were still a young species with primitive technology. When the Council fleet arrived at their home system, the humans would surrender immediately or be destroyed like every other species that had dared to challenge the established order. The Chancellor agreed that military action was necessary. The Council had maintained peace and stability in the galaxy for 10,000 years by demonstrating that resistance was futile. If they allowed humanity to defy their authority, other species might begin to think that rebellion was possible. Within a generation, the entire galactic order could collapse into chaos and war. Admiral Dexara was summoned to join the meeting. He commanded the First Fleet, which consisted of 10,000 of the most advanced warships ever built by any species in the galaxy. Each ship was the size of a small city and carried enough firepower to destroy planets. The First Fleet had never been defeated in battle and had conquered more worlds than any other military force in galactic history. The Admiral was a tall, thin being whose species had evolved from predatory birds that hunted in flocks across the skies of their homeworld. His people were natural tacticians who could coordinate complex military operations across vast distances of space. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Admiral Dexara reviewed the intelligence about humanity that his scouts had gathered. Earth was a single planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in a quiet region of the galaxy. The humans had only achieved faster than light travel within the last century, and their technology was primitive compared to most Council species. Their military consisted of a few hundred small ships that would be no match for even a single Council battlecruiser. The Admiral proposed a simple plan that would end the human problem quickly and efficiently. The First Fleet would travel to Earth's solar system and demand immediate surrender. When the humans refused, as they certainly would, the fleet would demonstrate Council power by destroying several of their outer planets. Faced with such overwhelming force, humanity would submit, just like every other species had done throughout galactic history. Chancellor Vextar approved the plan immediately. Within hours, the orders went out to every base and shipyard in Council space. The First Fleet would mobilize immediately and depart for human territory within days. The message would be clear to every species in the galaxy. Defying the Council meant extinction. Director Shailin raised one final concern before the meeting ended. The level of intelligence gathering demonstrated by the humans suggested capabilities far beyond anything they had encountered before. Perhaps they should send negotiators instead of warships to learn more about human technology and abilities. Knowledge was often more valuable than conquest, especially when dealing with unknown variables. Commandant Korthak dismissed her concerns with a wave of his armored hand. The Council had faced down rebellions before and crushed upstart species who thought they could challenge the established order. Humanity would be no different. Their intelligence gathering might be impressive, but it could not stop plasma cannons or deflect particle beam weapons. The meeting ended with unanimous agreement. The First Fleet would depart within 72 hours and arrive at Earth ready for battle. If humans were intelligent, they would surrender without fighting. If they were foolish, they would be destroyed as an example to other species who might consider rebellion. As the military leaders left to prepare their forces, none of them paid attention to the small maintenance robots cleaning the chamber. The devices looked exactly like standard Council equipment, but hidden inside their metal shells were sensors and transmitters that had been quietly gathering information throughout the entire meeting. Every word spoken, every plan discussed, and every tactical decision made was already being transmitted back to Earth. The Council believed they were preparing to crush another primitive rebellion. In reality, they were walking into a trap that had been set the moment Ambassador Taemin first set foot on their space station. Humanity had not come to beg for mercy or negotiate for favorable terms. They had come to study their enemy and prepare for a war that would change the galaxy forever. The First Fleet began emerging from hidden bases scattered across Council space. Massive battlecruisers that could crack planets like eggs. Carriers capable of deploying millions of fighter craft. Dreadnoughts armed with weapons that could destabilize stars. Ship after ship joined the growing armada until 10,000 vessels floated in formation, ready to bring death and destruction to anyone who dared challenge the Council's authority. Admiral Dex Ara stood on his flagship's command bridge, watching as his fleet prepared for departure. The ship was called Eternal Victory, and had served as his command vessel for over 2 centuries of successful campaigns. Its weapons had reduced proud civilizations to ash, and its shields had never been penetrated by enemy fire. Soon it would add humanity to its long list of conquered species. The departure was scheduled as a grand spectacle designed to inspire fear and awe throughout Council space. 10,000 ships arranged in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with fresh Council insignia, their weapons charged and ready for battle. News of the mobilization spread quickly across the galaxy. Some species whispered prayers for the unknown humans who had dared to challenge their masters. Others simply felt relief that the Council's wrath was directed elsewhere. As the First Fleet entered hyperspace heading toward the small yellow star that humanity called home, none of the crew members noticed the tiny objects that had attached themselves to their ship hulls during the departure ceremonies. The devices were smaller than coins, completely undetectable by Council sensors, and designed to remain inactive until they reached their destination. They were humanity's first gift. To the Galactic Council, though, the Council would not understand their purpose until it was far too late to matter. The giant space station floated in the darkness between stars like a metal city built by gods. It was bigger than most planets, and home to the Galactic Council that ruled over 47 different alien species. Inside the massive central chamber, thousands of strange creatures sat in floating chairs arranged in perfect circles. Some looked like walking crystals, others like giant insects, and many had shapes that hurt human eyes just to look at them. Ambassador Taemin walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. His black uniform looked very plain next to all the colorful robes and glowing armor worn by the alien delegates. He was the first human most of them had ever seen, and they stared at him like he was some kind of interesting animal. 3 days ago, his ship had arrived at the station asking for a meeting with the council leadership. They had agreed mostly because they were curious about this new species that claimed to come from a place called Earth. High Chancellor Vextar rose from his throne at the front of the chamber. He was 15 feet tall and made entirely of living crystal that changed colors when he spoke. His voice came not through sound but directly into the minds of everyone present. The other council members had elected him as their leader 3,000 years ago, and he had never lost a vote or failed to crush a rebellion since then. The Chancellor spoke to the human in a tone that dripped with contempt. He explained that the Council had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. They had conquered proud warrior races that had fought with honor and skill. They had enslaved civilizations that possessed technology beyond most species' dreams. They had broken entire star systems that dared to resist their will. What could one small species from an unknown world possibly offer that would interest the mighty Council? Taemin listened patiently as the alien leader boasted about their countless victories. Around the chamber, other delegates began to speak, in their various languages, creating a noise like 1,000 different animals all talking at once. Some made clicking sounds, others howled like wolves, and a few simply hummed at frequencies that made the air shimmer and dance. All of them seemed amused by the lone human standing before their massive assembly. When the noise finally died down, Taemin spoke in a clear, calm voice. He said that humanity was offering the Council a simple choice. They could live in peace, with humans sharing knowledge and resources for the benefit of all species. Or they could try to conquer Earth like they had conquered every other world they encountered. The choice was entirely up to them, but they would need to decide quickly. The chamber erupted in what could only be called laughter, though it sounded like nothing any human had ever heard. The crystalline delegates rang like bells, the insect creatures made rapid clicking sounds, and several species simply roared with amusement. One delegate shouted that humans must be joking if they thought they could threaten the Council. Another called them foolish children who did not understand the reality of galactic politics. Chancellor Vextar raised one massive arm and the chamber fell silent immediately. His crystal body pulsed with different colors as he addressed the human again. He explained that the Council possessed the combined military power of 47 different species. Their fleets numbered in the millions of ships, each one capable of destroying entire planets. Their armies were beyond counting. Their weapons could tear apart stars, and their technology had been perfected through thousands of successful conquests. The Chancellor continued his speech, growing more dramatic with each word. He told Taemin that humanity had exactly one ship, one representative, and one small backward world that had barely learned to travel between the stars. What did they possibly think they could do against such overwhelming power? Did they really believe that empty threats would frighten beings who had conquered half the galaxy? Taemin waited until the alien leader finished speaking, then reached inside his jacket. The delegates leaned forward, curious about what primitive technology this human might produce. From his pocket he withdrew a small device no bigger than his hand. It looked simple and unremarkable compared to the advanced technology surrounding them in the chamber. With a gentle press of his thumb against a button on the device, holographic displays suddenly appeared throughout the entire chamber. The images showed detailed technical drawings of every Council warship, space station, and military installation. They included security codes, weapon specifications, shield frequencies, and even the personal daily schedules of important military commanders. Every delegate stared in shock as their most carefully guarded secrets were displayed for all to see. The silence that followed was more complete than anything the chamber had experienced in 1,000 years. Even the usually buzzing background noise of alien technology seemed to stop working. Taemin calmly explained that humanity had gathered all this information during the 3 days since his arrival, not through spies or secret agents, but simply by watching and learning. If the Council chose war, humanity would be ready for them. If they chose peace, this information would never be used against them. Several delegates began shouting questions and demands in their various languages. How had the humans penetrated security systems that had been built over thousands of years? What kind of technology allowed them to gather intelligence so quickly? Were there human spies hidden throughout council space that no one had detected? Taimin raised his hand for silence, and surprisingly the chamber grew quiet again. He explained that humans had developed their intelligence-gathering abilities through millions of years of surviving on a dangerous world. They had learned to observe patterns, find weaknesses, and adapt quickly to new situations. It was not advanced technology that made them effective, but simply the natural human talent for understanding how systems worked and finding ways to exploit their flaws. As Taimin prepared to leave the chamber, Chancellor Vextar demanded to know exactly what humanity wanted from the council. The human turned back and smiled politely. He said that humans wanted nothing more than the right to exist freely in the galaxy without being conquered, enslaved, or destroyed. They were not interested in ruling over other species or taking territory that belonged to others. All they asked for was respect and the chance to prove that cooperation worked better than domination. The Chancellor asked what would happen if the Council rejected this offer. Taimin replied that humanity would defend itself using every tool and technique at their disposal. They had survived ice ages that should have killed them, predators that should have eaten them, and disasters that should have ended their civilization. They would not submit to slavery no matter how powerful their enemies might be. With that final statement, Taimin walked out of the chamber, leaving behind thousands of confused and frightened alien delegates. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they did not understand. The holographic displays continued showing their military secrets while they tried to comprehend how one human from an unknown world had just challenged their entire civilization. The age of easy conquests was about to end, and nobody in the chamber was prepared for what would come next.